How much is your life worth? To your family, you are priceless. But to the Ford Motor Company in 1972, you were worth exactly $200,000. This is the story of a corporation that discovered a fatal flaw in their car. They knew people would burn. They knew how to fix it for just $11. But they did the math, and they decided it was cheaper to let you die. Welcome to the Empire Archives.
May 28, 1972. A perfect Sunday afternoon in San Bernardino, California. The air was warm, the radio was playing the hits. Lily Gray, a 52-year-old grandmother, was driving her brand-new Ford Pinto. Sitting next to her was her neighbor, 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw. They were just heading home.
In Lily's mind, she was driving the safest, smartest car in America. It was small, fuel-efficient, modern. She didn't know she was sitting on top of a bomb. She didn't know the machines surrounding her had a secret, fatal flaw. A flaw that wasn't an engineering mistake, but a corporate choice.
As they merged onto the freeway, the Pinto's carburetor stalled. The car lost power and coasted to a stop in the middle lane. Terrifying? Yes, but it shouldn't have been deadly. Moments later, a Ford Galaxy traveling at 28 miles per hour rear-ended them. 28 miles per hour. In the world of car crashes, that's a fender bender. You get whiplash. You spill your coffee. You call a tow truck. But the Pinto didn't dent. It disintegrated. Upon impact, the fuel tank ruptured, spraying gallons of gasoline into the passenger cabin. A spark ignited the fumes. In less than a second, the interior reached 2,000 degrees. Lily Gray burned to death inside the vehicle. Richard Grimshaw managed to crawl out, but by the time he hit the asphalt, 90% of his body was destroyed. He lost his nose, his ears, his fingers. The police report called it a tragedy, but the documents found years later, they called it something else. They called it a cost savings. This is the story of the memo that killed 900 people. Now, to understand why the Pinto was built to burn, you have to go back 4 years. 1968. Detroit. The Ford Motor Company is an empire, but the empire is under siege. A new wave of cars is flooding American streets. Volkswagen, Toyota. They're small, cheap, reliable, and they are eating Ford alive. Enter Lee Iacocca, the president of Ford, the golden boy, the man who invented the Mustang. Iacocca was a marketing genius, but he was also a tyrant. He looked at the sales numbers and panicked. He needed a subcompact car to crush the Japanese, and he needed it yesterday. So he issued a decree that became law inside the company, the limits of 2,000. The new car, the Pinto, had to weigh under 2,000 pounds, and it had to cost under $2,000. But the real killer was the schedule. A typical car took 43 months to go from idea to production. Iacocca gave them 25. This wasn't a timeline. It was a death march. Engineers were told to skip tooling checks, skip safety validations, just build the car. The atmosphere in the plant was pure fear. Senior executives were fired on the spot if they questioned the deadline. When one engineer suggested adding extra weight for crash protection, Iacocca famously snapped, "Safety doesn't sell." He wanted a car that looked good and was cheap. If it was safe, that was a bonus. If it wasn't, well, that was the driver's problem. That pressure led to a catastrophic design choice. To save trunk space and weight, engineers placed the fuel tank in the worst possible location, behind the rear axle, hanging just inches from the back bumper, and it gets worse. The rear differential had exposed bolts on it, long, sharp metal bolts. The engineers realized that in a rear-end collision, the axle would be shoved forward, driving those bolts straight into the gas tank like a spear. And here's the thing, they knew this before the car launched. We know they knew because we have the footage. Ford ran secret crash tests on 11 modified Pintos. In 8 out of 11 tests, the tank ruptured. The test drivers described hearing a sickening crunch, followed by the sound of liquid pouring onto the pavement. The solution was simple: a plastic baffle, a rubber bladder, a steel plate. Any of these would have stopped the fire. The cost? Between $5 and $11 per car. But adding $11 would break the rule of 2,000. It would hurt the profit margin, so the fix was killed. The car went to the assembly line with a naked, vulnerable tank. But building the car was only half the crime. To keep the Pinto legal, Ford had to declare war on the U.S. government. See, in the early 70s, the NHTSA was trying to pass a new law. They wanted all cars to survive a rear-end collision at 30 miles per hour without leaking fuel. Reasonable, right? It would save thousands of lives. But Ford knew the Pinto couldn't pass it. So they dispatched an army of lobbyists to Washington. They argued that the government was stifling innovation. They delayed the law for 8 years, while their lobbyists were drinking scotch with senators, ensuring the law was delayed. Real people were burning to death on the highways. Now, here is where the story gets psychological. Meet Dennis Gioia. In 1973, he was the recall coordinator at Ford. It was his job to look at the photos of burned cars and decide if there was a problem. He saw the reports. He saw the photos of charred bodies. He saw the pattern. And yet, he voted against a recall. Years later, Gioia admitted the truth. He said the culture at Ford was so intense, so focused on profit that his morality had been scripted out of him. He stopped seeing families. He only saw data. And that data led to the creation of the most infamous document in corporate history, the Pinto Memo. Ford's accountants sat down to answer a simple question. Is it cheaper to save these people, or is it cheaper to let them die? Let's look at their math. Option A. Fix the fuel tanks. With 12.5 million cars and trucks on the road, the cost to add the $11 safety shield would be $137 million. Option B. Do nothing. Let the cars explode. Pay the lawsuits. They estimated that 180 people would burn to death, and another 180 would suffer serious burns. And this is the line that makes you sick. They assigned a value to a human life. $200,000. That was the price of a father, a mother, or a child. When they added up the lawsuits, the total came to $49.5 million. It was basic arithmetic, really. 49 is less than 137. Therefore, it was good business to let people burn. For years, the memo stayed buried. But in 1977, a journalist named Mark Dowie received a brown paper package. Inside were the internal documents, the secret tests, the lobbying records, and the memo. Dowie wrote an expose titled Pinto Madness for Mother Jones magazine. When it hit the stands, it didn't just cause a scandal, it caused a panic. For the first time, the American public realized that a corporation had actually priced out their lives. Ford tried to deny it. They called the article hysterical. But the damage was done. The secret was out. And then came the reckoning. Richard Grimshaw. Grimshaw survived the fire, but he lived in agony. He sued Ford, and during the discovery phase, his lawyers confirmed everything Mark Dowie had written. When the Pinto Memo was handed to the jury, the room went cold. They weren't looking at a car accident anymore. They were looking at a confession. The defense tried to argue that this was standard industry practice. They said, all companies do cost-benefit analysis. But the jury didn't care. They went into the deliberation room and they were furious. They wanted to punish Ford. They wanted to hurt them. They came back with a verdict of $125 million in punitive damages. It was an unheard of amount. It was more than the profit Ford made on the Pinto. It was a message. We know what you did. The verdict forced Ford's hand. They issued a recall for 1.5 million Pintos, the largest recall in history at the time. Lee Iacocca was fired shortly after. Not because of the deaths, mind you, but because of the bad press. He went on to run Chrysler and became a business celebrity. He never apologized. Richard Grimshaw used his settlement money to pay for dozens of surgeries. He lived with the scars of Ford's arithmetic for the rest of his life. The Ford Pinto is gone, but the calculation remains. Every time a company decides to cut a corner or hide a defect or save a few pennies on safety, they are doing the math of murder. I'm James Tudor. This is the Empire Archives. Subscribe for the truth they don't want you to know.